Imagine a fleet of ships so vast that it could cover the horizon. Ships carrying treasures, soldiers, and even giraffes. This isn't a scene from a movie. It was real in the 15th century, under the command of one man, Zheng He, the admiral who changed the course of maritime history. But who was he, and why were his voyages so important? Born in 1371, during the Ming Dynasty in China, Zheng He's early life was marked by tragedy. As a young boy, he was captured by imperial troops, castrated, and taken to serve in the imperial palace. But instead of fading into obscurity, he rose to become one of history's greatest explorers. Commanding gigantic fleets known as treasure ships, Zheng He navigated to more than 30 countries, establishing trade routes and diplomatic connections that linked China to the world. His journeys were a landmark in navigation history, but they were also shrouded in mysteries and controversies. The scale of his expeditions was simply breathtaking. While European explorers would later set sail with just a handful of ships, Zheng He commanded armadas of over 300 vessels, some measuring up to 400 feet in length, 4 times larger than Columbus's Santa Maria would be decades later. What drove this extraordinary man? What treasures and knowledge did he bring back to China? And why, after such spectacular achievements, did China suddenly abandon its maritime dominance? If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of great empires, like this video, subscribe to the Medieval Archives and don't miss a single episode. Join us as we explore the remarkable story of Zheng He, the forgotten admiral whose voyages might have changed world history forever. Zheng He began his life as He, a Muslim boy born in the mountainous Yunnan province. At just 10 years old, his life took a dramatic turn when imperial troops invaded his homeland during the Ming conquest. Young He was captured, castrated, and sent to serve in the imperial palace, a cruel practice used to create loyal servants who could never threaten the imperial lineage. But fate had extraordinary plans for this boy. While most eunuchs lived in obscurity, He's remarkable intelligence, physical strength, and quick thinking caught the attention of Prince Zhu, the future Emperor Yongle. As the prince's loyal bodyguard and confidant, He fought bravely alongside him during a civil war that ultimately placed Zhu on the throne in 1402. As a reward for his loyalty, He received a new name, Zheng He, and rose rapidly through the ranks of the imperial court. Despite being a eunuch, a Muslim, and not ethnically Han Chinese, Zheng He became one of the most trusted advisors to the most powerful man in China. Think about that for a moment. A former captive becoming the right-hand man to the ruler of the greatest empire on earth at that time. But why would Emperor Yongle choose this outsider to lead the most ambitious naval expeditions in Chinese history? Why not an experienced admiral from a noble family? The answer lies in trust and vision. Zheng He had proven his absolute loyalty through years of service. His Muslim background gave him valuable knowledge of foreign lands and customs beyond China's borders. And perhaps most importantly, as a eunuch with no family lineage to protect, Zheng He's ambitions were perfectly aligned with the glory of the emperor, not personal dynastic power. Did you know that Zheng He brought a giraffe back to China? This extraordinary animal was a gift from the Sultan of Malindi in Africa and caused a sensation throughout the empire. The Chinese had never seen such a creature before and believed it to be a mythical qilin, a magical beast that only appears during the reign of a virtuous emperor. The giraffe was exhibited in the imperial palace as living proof of the greatness of Zheng He's expeditions and the heavenly mandate of Emperor Yongle's rule. Court poets wrote verses about it, artists created paintings, and people traveled for miles just to catch a glimpse of this magical creature from distant lands. This was the genius of Zheng He's expeditions. They weren't just about mapping new territories or establishing trade. They were elaborate diplomatic missions designed to expand Chinese influence and bring exotic wonders back to impress both the Chinese people and visiting foreign dignitaries. Each treasure, animal, and foreign emissary that returned with Zheng He's fleet reinforced the message. The Ming Dynasty was the center of the civilized world, and all other kingdoms existed in its magnificent shadow. The ships commanded by Zheng He weren't just vessels. They were floating cities, true marvels of engineering that would make even modern observers stand in awe. Known as treasure ships, these wooden leviathans could carry up to 500 people each and stretched over 400 feet in length. To put that in perspective, that's nearly 1.5 football fields, 4 times larger than Columbus's Santa Maria would be, decades later when Europeans finally ventured into unknown waters. But what made these ships truly remarkable wasn't just their size. The Chinese shipbuilders had perfected technologies that European shipwrights wouldn't master for centuries. Each treasure ship featured watertight compartments that prevented sinking even if parts of the hull were breached. They utilized sophisticated compasses for navigation and were equipped with multiple masts bearing red silk sails, a color reserved for imperial missions. And these massive treasure ships were just the flagship vessels. Zheng He's complete fleet numbered over 300 ships of various types, creating an armada that stretched across the horizon when at sea. The fleet included specialized warships bristling with early cannons and crossbows, high-speed escort vessels, massive supply ships carrying food and fresh water, repair vessels equipped with workshops for at-sea maintenance, and even special ships designed specifically to transport exotic animals like giraffes, zebras, and ostriches back to the imperial court. Imagine being a local ruler, perhaps in what is now Malaysia or Kenya, watching this armada appear on your horizon. Hundreds of enormous ships bearing the dragon flags of the Ming Dynasty. The psychological impact alone would have been overwhelming. Many kingdoms simply offered tribute and friendship before a single Chinese sailor set foot on their shores. The logistics of building such a fleet were staggering. Entire forests were cleared to provide the timber. Tens of thousands of workers labored in imperial shipyards, using techniques passed down through generations. Special waterways were dug just to launch these massive vessels. And once at sea, feeding a crew of over 27,000 men required careful planning that would challenge even modern military operations. What's particularly fascinating is that these treasure ships carried more than just trade goods. They were floating embassies, scientific expeditions, and military forces all in one. Their cargo holds contained fine porcelain, silk, and precious metals to trade, but also elaborate gifts from the emperor himself. Special envoys, translators, astronomers, physicians, and naturalists traveled aboard, collecting knowledge and mapping new territories. When Zheng He's fleet arrived in a foreign port, it wasn't just a trading mission. It was a spectacular demonstration of Chinese power, wealth, and technological superiority. No kingdom in the world could match such grandeur, and this wasn't by accident. It was precisely what Emperor Yongle intended, to showcase Ming Dynasty China as the undisputed center of civilization and power across the known world. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He led 7 extraordinary expeditions that would reshape global relations and maritime history. These weren't simple journeys, they were massive diplomatic missions that spanned half the known world. While Europeans were still hugging their coastlines, Zheng He boldly crossed the Indian Ocean multiple times, creating networks that connected East Asia with Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and even the eastern coast of Africa. The scale of these voyages is difficult to comprehend. His first expedition alone included 27,000 men, more people than lived in most European cities at that time. His fleets visited over 30 different kingdoms, from the Spice Islands of Indonesia to the trading ports of Calicut in India, from the pearl markets of Ceylon to the exotic coastlines of Kenya and Somalia. At each destination, Zheng He followed a carefully choreographed diplomatic protocol. He would present magnificent gifts from the emperor, exquisite silks, fine porcelains, and intricate works of art that demonstrated Chinese craftsmanship. In return, local rulers offered their own treasures, spices, ivory, precious gems, and exotic animals. The giraffe that captivated the imperial court was just one of many wonders brought back from these distant lands. But make no mistake, these weren't merely friendly visits. Each expedition carried a powerful message. China was the Middle Kingdom, the center of civilization, and other nations existed in its orbit. Foreign rulers were expected to acknowledge the supremacy of the Ming Emperor by paying tribute. Those who welcomed the fleet were rewarded with trade privileges and protection. Those who resisted faced the military might of the world's most powerful navy. Take the case of Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka. When local rulers attempted to double-cross Zheng He during his third voyage, he didn't hesitate to land troops and capture the king. The ruler was taken back to China in chains, where the emperor eventually pardoned him and sent him home. A powerful lesson in the consequences of defying Chinese authority. In the Strait of Malacca, Zheng He crushed notorious pirate fleets that had terrorized shipping lanes for generations, establishing Chinese control over this crucial maritime choke point. By creating safe passage for merchant vessels, he helped regional trade flourish under Chinese protection. Yet most kingdoms welcomed the treasure fleets peacefully. Chinese goods were highly sought after, and an alliance with the mighty Ming Dynasty brought prestige and security. Dozens of foreign ambassadors returned with Zheng He to China, establishing the first truly global diplomatic network. Some scholars believe that over 100 states sent representatives to pay homage to the Chinese emperor during this period. Perhaps most remarkable was how these voyages connected cultures that had previously known little about each other. Chinese astronomers learned from Arab navigators. African artisans exchanged techniques with Chinese craftsmen. Medicines, crops, and technologies spread across vast distances. These weren't just journeys of discovery. They were creating the first truly international exchange of knowledge and culture. What's particularly fascinating is that Zheng He accomplished all this decades before Europeans would begin their own age of exploration. His detailed maps and navigational knowledge may even have indirectly influenced later European voyages. How different might world history have been if China had maintained these massive naval expeditions instead of later turning inward? Hey, did you know that Zheng He brought a giraffe back to China? If you're enjoying this video, hit that like button, share it with your history-loving friends, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more incredible stories from the past. And tell us in the comments, what's the most surprising thing you've learned about Zheng He so far? Was it his massive ships, his diplomatic missions, or maybe how he rose from captivity to command the world's most powerful fleet? Let us know below. In 1424, Emperor Yongle, Zheng He's greatest patron and the visionary behind the treasure fleets, died. With his passing, the winds of change began to blow through the imperial court. Zheng He would lead one final seventh expedition from 1431 to 1433. But the golden era of Chinese maritime exploration was drawing to a close. What happened next remains one of history's great mysteries. After dominating the seas for nearly 3 decades and establishing China as the undisputed naval power across half the globe, the treasure fleet suddenly stopped sailing. Zheng He himself died during or shortly after his final voyage. Some accounts suggest he was buried at sea, though others claim his tomb exists in China's Nanjing province. But the most shocking twist came next. The new Emperor Xuande and his successors didn't just end the voyages, they systematically erased them from history. The magnificent treasure ships were left to rot in their harbors or deliberately destroyed. Shipyards were dismantled. Construction of large, sea-going vessels was forbidden by imperial decree. Even the detailed navigational charts and maps created during these epic journeys were locked away or destroyed. Why would an empire deliberately abandon its greatest technological and diplomatic achievement? The mystery has fascinated historians for centuries. Some scholars point to the enormous financial cost. Each expedition required the resources of the entire empire: timber from distant forests, skilled labor from across the realm, and vast quantities of supplies. The imperial treasury was strained, and conservative Confucian officials argued the money could be better spent on pressing domestic concerns, especially defending against Mongol threats from the north. Others see a deeper cultural shift. The Confucian scholars who dominated the imperial bureaucracy had always been suspicious of foreign contact and commerce. They considered merchants and traders to be among the lowest classes in society, far beneath farmers and artisans who produced tangible goods. To them, Zheng He's voyages represented a dangerous fascination with the outside world that threatened traditional Chinese values. There's also a fascinating theory about court politics. Eunuchs like Zheng He had gained unprecedented power under Emperor Yongle. After his death, the traditional noble families sought to reclaim their influence by undermining eunuch-led projects, including the treasure fleets. Whatever the reason, the consequences were profound. Within decades, China issued the infamous Haijin, or maritime ban, making it a crime punishable by death to build ships with more than 2 masts or to sail beyond coastal waters. The once mighty Chinese Navy was reduced to small patrol boats fighting coastal pirates. The timing couldn't have been more significant. Just as China was deliberately turning inward, European powers were beginning to look outward. Decades after Zheng He's final voyage, explorers like Columbus, da Gama and Magellan would set sail in ships far smaller than the Chinese treasure ships, seeking routes to the very lands Zheng He had already visited. Imagine how different world history might have been if the treasure fleets had continued to sail. Would Chinese colonies have spread across Southeast Asia, India and Africa? Would Chinese ships have reached the Americas before Columbus? Would Mandarin, rather than English, be the global language of commerce today? Zheng He's legacy remains as a tantalizing glimpse of an alternate history, proof that China was a global maritime superpower capable of projecting influence across oceans decades before European nations even dreamed of such capabilities. His voyages demonstrated that China possessed the technology, resources, and organizational skill to dominate global trade and diplomacy. Today, as China once again emerges as a global power with expansive maritime ambitions, the story of Zheng He has taken on new significance. His voyages are celebrated as evidence of China's historical role as a peaceful maritime power, eager for trade rather than conquest, a narrative that resonates deeply in contemporary Chinese identity and foreign policy. The treasure ships may be gone, their grand achievements deliberately hidden for centuries, but Zheng He's story endures, a reminder that history's path is never inevitable, and that the rise and fall of great powers often hinges on decisions made in distant palace halls. The magnificent voyages of Zheng He have sparked fierce debates among historians for centuries. On the surface, these expeditions appear to be straightforward diplomatic and commercial missions, spreading Chinese influence, establishing trade networks, and showcasing Ming Dynasty power. But as with many historical events of this magnitude, the deeper you look, the more complex the picture becomes. What was the true purpose behind Emperor Yongle sending these massive fleets across the oceans? The official Ming records describe them as missions to manifest the transforming power and magnificent virtue of the Chinese emperor. But reading between the lines reveals much more. Some historians argue these voyages were primarily about legitimacy. Emperor Yongle had seized power in a bloody civil war, overthrowing his nephew in what many considered an illegitimate coup. By sending Zheng He to collect tribute and recognition from foreign rulers, he could prove that the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule, truly belonged to him. Each foreign ambassador who kowtowed before the Dragon Throne reinforced his claim to power. Others see a more strategic military purpose. The treasure fleets didn't just carry diplomats and traders, they transported thousands of soldiers and were heavily armed with early cannons and other weapons. In multiple instances, Zheng He didn't hesitate to use military force. He captured the king of Ceylon, battled pirates in Southeast Asia, and intervened in a civil war in Java to install a China-friendly ruler. Were these actions simply maintaining order along trade routes, or the first steps toward creating vassal states under Chinese control? Particularly fascinating is how different the Chinese approach was from later European colonization. Where European powers established forts, seized territory, and extracted resources by force, Zheng He's fleets came and went, leaving behind ambassadors and traders rather than governors and garrisons. Was this a fundamentally different philosophy of foreign relations, or simply the first phase of what might have become a more aggressive expansion had the voyages continued? Perhaps the most controversial theory of all suggests that Zheng He's fleets may have reached far beyond the documented destinations. Some researchers point to curious maps, oral traditions, and even physical evidence suggesting that Chinese ships may have reached the Americas decades before Columbus. A handful of scholars have found what they believe to be Chinese anchors off the California coast, and others point to similarities between Chinese artifacts and pre-Columbian American objects. The most famous and disputed evidence is the 1418 map, a chart that allegedly shows Chinese knowledge of world geography, including North and South America, decades before European explorations. Mainstream historians largely dismiss this map as a modern forgery, but it continues to fuel speculation about just how far Zheng He's fleets might have traveled. Adding to the mystery is the deliberate destruction of records after the voyages ended. When the Confucian faction gained control of the imperial court, they systematically purged many documents related to Zheng He's expeditions, considering them wasteful adventures that had diverted resources from more important domestic concerns. We'll never know what information was lost in this historical purge. What makes these controversies so compelling is that they're not just academic debates about the past. They reflect very current questions about how rising powers engage with the world. Today, as China develops its Belt and Road Initiative to build infrastructure and influence across Asia, Africa, and beyond, many see echoes of Zheng He's diplomatic and trade networks. Chinese leaders explicitly invoke his legacy as evidence of China's historically peaceful approach to international relations. Whether you see Zheng He as a peaceful ambassador of trade and culture, a military strategist expanding Chinese power, or an explorer who might have discovered new continents, one thing is undeniable. His voyages were an unparalleled achievement in the history of navigation and global connection. They demonstrated what was possible when a great civilization turned its attention outward, and raised tantalizing questions about paths of history not taken when China decided to look inward instead. Zheng He was far more than just an admiral. He embodied the ambition, innovation, and global vision of Ming Dynasty China at its zenith. From humble beginnings as a captured Muslim boy to commanding the greatest fleet the world had seen, his life story reads like an epic tale of transformation and triumph. His 7 voyages didn't merely establish trade routes or diplomatic relationships, they connected entire civilizations. In ports from Malacca to Mombasa, Chinese silks were exchanged for African ivory, Indian spices traded for Middle Eastern gems. Ideas, technologies, and artistic styles crossed cultural boundaries, creating ripples of influence that can still be detected in architecture, cuisine, and art across the Indian Ocean region today. Perhaps the most tantalizing aspect of Zheng He's story is what might have been. Had the treasure fleets continued to sail, had China maintained its maritime dominance, how different might our world look today? Would Chinese culture and language have spread across the globe? Would the age of European colonization have unfolded differently against Chinese naval power? Would technologies have developed along entirely different paths? When China turned inward and burned its magnificent fleet, it created one of history's greatest what-if moments, a pivot point where the fate of civilizations hung in the balance. Within decades of China abandoning the seas, Portuguese caravels would begin their own explorations, setting the stage for centuries of European maritime dominance. The story of Zheng He reminds us that history is not a straight, inevitable path. It twists and turns based on decisions made in palace halls, on economic pressures, on cultural attitudes, even on the vision of single individuals. His legacy serves as a powerful reminder that great civilizations rise and fall not just through conquest and conflict, but through exploration, exchange, and the courage to venture into the unknown. In our modern world, as new powers rise and global connections deepen, the lessons of Zheng He's voyages take on fresh relevance. They show us both the tremendous potential of international engagement and the consequences of retreat and isolation. As we close this chapter on the remarkable life of Admiral Zheng He, I hope you've gained a new appreciation for this often overlooked giant of history. A man who commanded ships larger than football fields, who brought giraffes to the Forbidden City, who mapped oceans and connected continents decades before Columbus ever set sail. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, share it with your history-loving friends, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives for more fascinating content about the medieval world and beyond. Drop a comment below with what historical figure or event you'd like us to explore next. Until our next historical adventure, remember that the past is full of incredible stories just waiting to be discovered.